So last Friday, Nintendo made a pretty big announcement that they were delaying Metroid Prime 4. Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk About Things. Today we're going to be talking about Metroid's delay because that was the big news that broke last Friday. Obviously Nintendo put out a video talking about how there was an update to the development of Metroid Prime 4, and to everyone's surprise, it was that the game has been pretty much entirely thrown out. What is currently believed to have been Bandai Namco was developing the game. Nintendo never officially announced that, but a couple of sources have come out saying that Bandai Namco was developing it, and basically everything they've been working on since the announcement, or maybe even a little bit before, has been scrapped. It's unusable. Nintendo was not happy with it, and Retro Studios is now restarting development of Metroid Prime 4, which will probably mean that Metroid is like 3, 4, maybe 5 years away from seeing release, and it's kind of a huge bummer, but it may not be so bad as we think it is right now. So I wanted to hold off making this video on Friday because I didn't want to have a hot take. I didn't want to just go in there guns blazing and say things. I wanted to wait for some information to drop and for time to pass to process the information, not just get a gut reaction. And thankfully that worked out, because some information was dropped after the initial announcement, not by Nintendo, but some information did come out. Now the source of this information is Imran Khan. He is the one of the senior editors over at Game Informer, and he released a bunch of tweets basically talking about the background of what's been going on with Metroid Prime 4, why he believes it was canceled, and some other little tidbits that we're going to be discussing here to kind of just paint a better picture of why the game isn't coming out and what was going on behind the scenes. So Khan stated that the game was being developed by Bandai Namco, and what Bandai Namco was doing is basically what other companies like Ubisoft do, in that a multitude of different Bandai Namco studios were working on Metroid Prime 4 just from different locations around the globe. And that some teams were reporting back positively, they were saying the game was going great, development was good, and other teams were reporting back that they were having trouble, or that the game just wasn't coming together. And it seems like this has kind of created a muddled and confused statement going forward to Nintendo, because like, what does that mean? Some studios are working on part of the game and it's great, some studios are working on the same part of the game or a different part of the game and it's a complete nightmare. That's why I believe we haven't seen Metroid Prime 4 for so long, or actually technically at all. All we got was the initial logo reveal, and we haven't seen anything since, what was that, E3 2017? We just haven't seen this game, and it's been quite a long time. We should have at least gotten a trailer, but I believe that that's why we haven't seen the game. It's just because Nintendo was so confused behind the scenes and not really understanding what was going on in development that it was hard for them to piece together a good trailer and give a good, comprehensive look at the game, because there wasn't anything to look at. Khan also teased that Metroid, the Prime trilogy, is just done. It's complete. Nintendo has been sitting on it, and they haven't released it or announced it yet because they wanted to coincide it with Metroid Prime 4, of course, because that makes sense. And in fact, the two games were meant to be shown off at the Game Awards, something that was rumored heavily beforehand. One of the most notable sources, of course, was Pixelpar, who is a pretty popular rumor leaker, whatever you want to call it. And he put this whole thing out about it, and it just didn't happen. Instead, of course, we got the Joker reveal, and it kind of took everyone by surprise. Because even within the Smash community, the rumor was that Square Enix was going to have a character announced at the Game Awards, not Atlas or Sega. So it was weird that Joker showed up, and that was kind of completely out of left field for everybody. So here's kind of the timeline I have kind of pieced together in events that I think of how they more or less occurred and why we haven't been seeing this game. The first part of it is that Metroid Prime 4 goes into development probably around the time it was announced, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit after, I'm not entirely sure. It goes into development, the Bandai Namco studios start working on everything, and they start reporting to Nintendo completely different things from different studios. Some studios are moving fine great, some studios are doing good work, some studios are completely burning and crashing and have no idea what they're doing. This kind of makes sense to me because this isn't the kind of game you expect Bandai Namco to work on anyways. Of course, Bandai Namco was also developing Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and they did a great job on that because they are a fighting game team. They are built to do that. They put out the Dragon Ball games, they put out Tekken, they put out, I believe, Soul Calibur as well. So that's like what their bread and butter. as far as series, and I'm not entirely sure why Nintendo placed Metroid, of all things, in their hands. It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems like a bad decision, and obviously at this point, I think Nintendo has recognized that. So at this point, Retro starts realizing that development is messy. The Bandai Namco team really doesn't understand what they're doing, and they put together a pitch, a little demo, and pitch it to Nintendo. Nintendo sees the demo, they approve of it, and they decide that they want to cancel the Metroid Prime 4 that Bandai Namco is working on and shift development over to Retro Studios, the original developers of the Metroid Prime series. Now, the reason Nintendo might have not gone with Retro to begin with is that most of the staff that developed games like the Donkey Kong Country series and Metroid Prime aren't currently at Retro. They have left. In fact, there's been rumors that Retro was going to be closed for quite some time, and there's just been real, like, an internal mess going on at that company for a bunch of other different stuff. Of course, we haven't seen a game from Retro Studios in 5 years. The last title they put out was Tropical Freeze, and I believe they were responsible for the port as well, but I can't imagine that took 4 years to develop. So there's been some problems going on there. We've heard rumors that there was a canceled game. We've heard rumors of Star Fox Grand Prix. We really don't know what's going on at Retro, and that's probably why Nintendo didn't just ship them Metroid to begin with. If this game was developed while the original Metroid Prime team was still at Retro, I'm sure they would have put that in development at Retro instead of going to Bandai Namco. So Retro starts to receive all the game stuff for the data and everything that Bandai Namco has been working on, and they decide to just completely scrap everything, or at least most of it. I'm not sure what percentage of Bandai Namco's Metroid Prime will be in the final product, or if any of it will even be in it, but I'm assuming they scrapped at least a majority of the game based on Nintendo's statements in the update video they put out. So at this point, Nintendo has to kind of react to that. Nintendo probably had a idea of when this game was going to be released and what they wanted to do with it, specifically seeing, of course, the E3 announcement, which was at this point way too early given this unforeseen, delay, as well as the Metroid Prime trilogy just collecting dust at this point and should probably be out. So Retro delays it, Nintendo has to refigure everything, and this to me leads to the Game Awards. So I think originally at the Game Awards, Nintendo was going to show off Metroid Prime Trilogy, as well as probably at least a CG trailer for Metroid Prime 4. But because of the confusion around the game, and really it probably not having much to go off of, as well as development maybe shifting to Retro at that point as well, they just had to cancel that completely and wait to give us more information on Metroid at a later date. So this shifts Nintendo into kind of probably maybe even a panic state. They decide instead to go with the Joker reveal, which was the animated trailer that they put together, and this seems like a rushed decision to me as well, because we know from interviews with Sakurai that Joker is not even, was at least at that time, I don't know what the current status of it is, but at the time of the Game Awards announcement, Joker wasn't even playable in testing. They had just started development on Joker, which could potentially mean that there was a Square Enix character that was supposed to be revealed first, and maybe Nintendo decided to go with Joker because he'd appeal more to the fan base of the Game Awards. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe there was no Square Enix representation, going around, and that was just a rumor, that was misinformation. But seeing as people like Vergaben were talking about that, I tend to believe Vergaben, although at this point, the lack of a Square rep being revealed at the Game Awards seems a little bit fishy. Either way, they released Joker. It was probably going to be for a January Direct or some other Direct, but they move it forward. We don't get any gameplay for Joker. Joker also still has not been added to the website, which is another thing that I think shows how early of an announcement this was, and that it wasn't supposed to be this early, because all of the other characters have had at least their character art ready to go and uploaded on the website a couple hours after the reveal, and Joker at this point has been a couple weeks and we still haven't seen his character art updated on the website, or his character art at all, which leads me to believe it just doesn't exist yet, and that the character was rushed into an announcement that probably wasn't supposed to happen. So at this point, Nintendo has lost two big titles that they're probably going to be talking about in a Direct, which is Metroid Prime, the trilogy, and of course the Joker reveal. So that's really actually three things that they're probably going to talk about, and they've completely lost this at this point. They have to scrap the January Direct. They move some of the announcements over to the next Direct, which I'm going to assume at this point we'll probably be getting one in February, if not at the latest March, because we've gone way too far without a Direct in my opinion. And information that had to be released a little bit earlier was released on social media instead around the time that we were supposed to be getting a Direct. This is of course stuff for like the Yoshi trailer that came out and the announcement for that, and a couple of other tidbits that Nintendo revealed at that point. And I think those were all supposed to be in a Direct, but they moved them forward and just released them as their own individual announcements because of the delayed Direct that I think was a domino effect from Metroid Prime's delay. And then, of course, they put together that video. They released that video that announces everything that's going on with Metroid Prime. I don't think that that was a recent thing. I think that they had, a little bit more time of knowing what was going on, and that development has probably already started at Retro, although it's probably very early development. I don't think Nintendo would have just, as soon as that was, the idea came out, they would put out a video, because that just doesn't make sense to me. That seems like it'd be a little too rushed. So I think this all has been going on in the background since at least before the Game Awards, and was, early enough into 2018 that it affected the Game Awards announcement. Now, obviously, I don't know that. I could be talking out of my rear end here, and that the Joker reveal was always meant to be the reveal, and there was nothing else that was supposed to be announced that day. Of course, Smash Bros. Did release the same day as the Game Awards, so it does make sense that they would have had a Smash Bros. Character there, but seeing as there was just the announcement of not only Incineroar and Ken, but Piranha Plant. I feel like Piranha Plant maybe should have been held off for the Game Awards as a minor announcement, so maybe that was also a factor in it. I don't even know, because that makes sense to me that they could have had Metroid Prime announced at the Game Awards, as well as the announcement of the Fighter Pass. That would have worked really well in my opinion, and Joker would have been released a little bit later in the year. But again, that's speculation on my part. I have no actual inside information about that. That is just pure speculation. Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing when it comes to Metroid Prime 4. And the reason being is, had this game released in 2019, it would have had a lot of competition. We already have Pokemon releasing this year, we have Fire Emblem releasing this year, we have Animal Crossing releasing this year, we have Luigi's Mansion releasing this year, and of course in January, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe also released, and Bayonetta 3 might even be released this year. So with all of that, it seems like a pretty stacked year to throw in a game like Metroid Prime 4, which is already kind of a niche title that I think Nintendo is expecting to sell fairly well, given, the hype around the game. So I think it could benefit the game to be baked a little bit longer, given the development time it needs, and released on a weaker year. Basically the same thing they did with Super Smash Bros. It comes out in a year like 2018, that's a little bit lighter on releases. You have a couple of smaller titles like Pokemon Let's Go in the year, and then you come out with Metroid Prime 4. It's the big seller game, even though it usually wouldn't be, because people just have Switches and they want to pick something up. They pick up Metroid Prime 4, and it could lead to, success for that title. Or at the very least, Metroid Prime 4 could be a Xenoblade type situation, where it could be like the last game, and, it does better than you expect it to, but it wasn't like the big, huge holiday game, but there was something else, you know what I mean? But even then, in a year that's a little bit less strong, I think it's a better time for Metroid Prime 4, although I do have high expectations for the game, considering what Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was able to do, and the fact that that game is even more niche than Metroid. Also means that there's a high chance that we'll be seeing Retro's game soon. They've been working on a game for, as of right now, at least 5 years, since Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, and I don't think they've been taking 5 years and just doing nothing. It is possible that there was a canceled game, and maybe there's a second game in development or whatnot, but the fact that they're taking on development of Metroid Prime leads me to believe one of two things could have occurred. Either the game is done or near completion, and we'll be hearing about it very soon, or the game was just absolutely scrapped entirely in favor of working on Metroid. I really hope that it is coming out soon and that we're going to see an announcement, because if they've had 5 years to work on something and have just had scrapped ideas and have been able to do nothing, that would be really unfortunate, because Retro does put out some really good games. This could also be really, really good news for Retro. If Metroid does well and is a good seller and is coming from Retro, that could save the company, because like I said earlier in the video, there have been rumors that Nintendo is wanting to shut down Retro, but now if they bring out a good, heavy-hitting title, it could potentially save the studio, in my opinion, So, if you like their games and you like Metroid, I do highly recommend supporting Metroid Prime 4 when it eventually does release. This could also be a good opportunity for smaller titles. Specifically, my mind goes to Pikmin 4. We know that Pikmin 4 is at least in development, as a low priority game, but the fact that Nintendo now has a hole in the release schedule, and they were probably going to want to fill that, a smaller title like Pikmin 4 that is already probably at least a good ways into development. It probably started development after Pikmin 3, maybe alongside Hey Pikmin, maybe after Hey Pikmin, I'm not entirely sure. But if that game is in development, it could make sense to me that Nintendo could fast track it a little bit and move it more towards high priority to get it out in time for around when Metroid Prime was supposed to release, filling that slot. And I think that could be really good for a game like Pikmin that needs an opportunity to really shift away from low priority. But either way, again, that's speculation, but I think it could lead to maybe a smaller title being released instead of Metroid being released. I also have to give high praise here to Nintendo for being so transparent with something that is a pretty big loss for them. They've spent a lot of money developing Metroid Prime, and they certainly didn't have to say anything. They could have just gone dark and just shown it off when it was ready. They certainly, they did the same thing for Breath of the Wild. That game would just disappear for no reason and then come back when they were ready to talk about it. And I don't think anybody would have blamed them for doing that with Metroid Prime. But instead, they looked at how important this was to fans, they understood what fans wanted, and they decided to be transparent, despite it being bad news. And in my opinion, it's worked off. If you look at the likes to dislike ratio on that video, it's pretty good, and people seem to be understanding of what Nintendo is doing, and that they're just happy that Nintendo was clear about what's happening, as opposed to hiding it away like they kind of did with Breath of the Wild. And this points to Nintendo that's learning, and Nintendo that's getting better. Look at the difference between how fans reacted to Federation Force's announcement as opposed to Metroid Prime 4's announcement. It looks a lot better, and I'm very happy that Nintendo went forward with doing it the way they did. They've earned a lot of respect and a lot of good faith in my book, and I've already had a lot of that for Nintendo, but this really shows that this is a company that has integrity and that has, it cares about the quality, not only that it expects of itself, but that we expect of it, and they really met that today, in my opinion, with this announcement and how they handled it. It would make sense to me that the studio, I don't remember their name at the moment, but the studio behind Samus Returns is probably working on something for the Switch, maybe for the 3DS. It could be, like a Metroid Fusion remake or something, or a brand new game, maybe, I don't know. But I do think it makes sense that they could be working on something Metroid right now, and that maybe it won't be as long as we think before we see Samus. Maybe their game will come out. Maybe we'll get a 2D Metroid before we get the big 3D Metroid, which I think could be actually pretty good. For all that, hopefully I've quelled some of the, the distress around not having Metroid, but I do think this will be a better move for everybody at the end of the day. I'd personally rather would have a good game than, an Other M or an Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. And to see that Nintendo is not being tone deaf and, is in tune with what the fans want. Because remember when we were all screaming we wanted an Animal Crossing game and they gave us Amiibo Festival. Or when people were screaming that they wanted a Metroid game and they gave you Federation Force. You know what I mean? They're more in tune with the fans than they have ever been. And I'm super happy about that. And that leads me to believe in Nintendo a whole lot more than we could have in the Wii U era. And at the end of the day, that's the best thing we can get from this announcement. Despite anything else that could be going on, it's the fact that Nintendo is in tune with their audience, they know what their audience wants, and they're willing to deliver what their audience wants, despite the fact that they may be hurt in the process of doing so. Because, trust me, the delay of Metroid Prime 4 hurts Nintendo way more than it hurts any of us. That's 100%, and I don't think most companies, in gaming or otherwise, would have done what Nintendo did with that Metroid Prime 4 delay, and I'm entirely super proud of them for doing so. Alright guys, that's it for me from today. Remember to like, comment, favorite, subscribe, and share this information, with anybody who may be interested in Metroid Prime 4 and wants to know what the heck is going on with that. And we'll see you guys next time. I'm sorry again for the delays in videos, and that's all because, I've had guests over these couple weeks, and I just haven't been able to edit. But that is all ending soon, so this should be the first video that's back on track, and we should be continuing our normal schedule after the release of this video. That's all. See you guys next time.